Hey, Texas Values Facebook supporters, Jonathan Covey here. I'm the policy director for Texas Values, and joining me today, I have the senior policy advisor for Texas Values, Mary Elizabeth Castle, with me, and we want to talk with you a little bit about the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals oral arguments. Also, we'll talk some about the oral arguments in a recent case for vaccine mandates from the Biden administration. But we want to talk to you. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans met today in yet another hearing with the Texas heartbeat law. And we want to give you some analysis on how that went. But before we do that, Mary Elizabeth, it's been really quite a legal journey already for this 4-month-old law. Tell us a little bit about how we got to this point.
Yeah, so just to break it down in a simple fashion, the heartbeat law today still stands. So there's really no need to worry about what happened today too much, because we know that there was a success at the Supreme Court in their recent decision. Now, it gets a little complicated from there. So even though they upheld the law to where it could continue to be in effect, there were some technicalities, like there always are at the Supreme Court, and they did have a question about one of the defendants in the case. So as you remember, Planned Parenthood and the abortion providers were trying to sue a number of different people. That included the Attorney General, the governor. It included a host of other individuals, including one individual citizen who they thought would sue. Now, the Supreme Court dismissed all of those other cases, saying that they didn't have the proper legal requirements to sue them. But one question they did have was the heads of different state agencies. One of those included the medical board, the nursing board, and the licensing board. And the Supreme Court didn't decide whether or not the abortionists can move forward in their suit against those individuals. And so that's where we are now. They remanded, which means they just sent the court case back to the Fifth Circuit, which is the lower court of appeals. And that's where they left up the question, can they continue their case against these different state agency heads? But, it doesn't really matter too much today whether or not you can enforce the Texas heartbeat law, because it's still enforceable regardless of what is happening today.
Yeah, and it was really quite interesting because the oral arguments, they only lasted a little over 30 minutes, but right from the very start, there was just this incredibly energetic back and forth between the counsel on both sides and the panel of the 3 judges that were listening. And as far as the arguments themselves, there were some really incredibly complex legal issues surrounding things like Article 3 standing, diversity jurisdiction, certification. You heard all these words, that and so much more, and mostly only things that really lawyers care about. But without going too far into the weeds, one of the big questions that came up in the oral arguments was the issue of whether, like you said, Mary Elizabeth, the state licensing officials actually had any authority to enforce the heartbeat law. If you remember, like you were saying, the Supreme Court kind of left this argument, this question open in their decision on December 10th. They said, now, abortion providers, listen, you can't sue state court judges. You can't sue state court clerks. You can't sue the Texas Attorney General's office. But we are, however, going to let the case proceed at this point against the state licensing officials. You talked about the head of the Texas Medical Board, head of the nursing board, the pharmacy board, because these individuals may need to take some kind of enforcement action against someone who violates the Texas heartbeat law. So fast forward to today, and this panel, there were 3 judges, Fifth Circuit Court judges, and they were really digging into this question, right? Texas heartbeat law says it's only enforceable by private parties through civil enforcement mechanisms. However, if the Supreme Court has allowed this case to go forward because state licensing officials may have some duty to, for instance, yank a doctor's license for violating the heartbeat law, well, how do we resolve this? How is this resolved? And this is where you saw all the talk about lawyers from both sides. They kept referring to this term, the eerie guess. And this doesn't mean that lawyers were getting creepy vibes from the hearing or anything like that. The term actually comes from an early Supreme Court decision. It was the Erie Railroad Company versus Tompkins. And what it means is that the federal court, when it has a question before it of state law, like the heartbeat law, it first has to consider any questions, any relevant decisions by the state's highest court. However, when, like in this case with the heartbeat law, there is no case directly on point, a federal court has to make an attempt to predict what a state's highest court would decide if it were to address the issue itself. So they're kind of making, in a way, they're kind of making a guess. And that's what one of the Fifth Circuit Court judges said that the Supreme Court was doing. They were making an eerie guess about the way that the Texas Supreme Court would likely rule. The state of Texas was arguing that the heartbeat law should be upheld. And they really made the argument that this question needed to be, quote unquote, certified or sent to the Texas Supreme Court. Basically, they were saying we need the Texas Supreme Court to weigh in on this decision and clarify what the duties are of these state licensing officials. And then on the other hand, the attorneys for the abortion providers, they were arguing that having the Texas Supreme Court weigh in was basically just a tactic to delay or to stall. They said the Fifth Circuit should just go ahead and immediately remand that case back to the trial court, back to Judge Robert Pittman, which many expect he would try to block the heartbeat law. So it was very interesting. We also had one of the judges on the panel say that they said, why wouldn't they just sit on this case and do nothing until the Supreme Court rules in the Dobbs case later on this year? And the Dobbs case, as you remember, was the case that concerns substantive issues of Roe v. Wade. So just so many things packed into 35 minutes of arguments. But I think you really nailed it. Two of the takeaways that are just really important in this case is, number one, this case has significantly narrowed since it's first started. And we're now seeing the nitty-gritty legal arguments come out. And not only that, but the pathway for abortion providers who want to stop the heartbeat law has gotten substantially smaller. And then number two, like you said, there's no indication that we got out of these oral arguments that the heartbeat law is even close to being stopped. And as long as the heartbeat law is in effect, the heartbeat law is saving lives. In fact, nearly 20,000 lives to date. I think we'll hit 20,000 in about 2 weeks. So, which, speaking of, Mary Elizabeth, is about the time that we will be going to Washington, D.C. As well. We'll have some members from our team traveling up on January 21st for the March for Life. We'll be participating in that and celebrating pro-life issues and the pro-life cause. So we're looking forward to that as well. But just a very, very interesting legal arguments. And here at Texas Values, we also are getting some things going regarding some resources for pro-life issues as well.
Yeah, that's right. Once we save the lives, that's not the end of the work. And many people, even our opponents, realize that reality. What happens, once that baby's life is saved? What kind of life will that baby have afterwards? We realize sometimes these pregnancies happen in circumstances that are not ideal financially, or that are problematic as far as family structure or the personal things of the mother's life. And so we want to make sure that these mothers and these babies have the resources that they need to get started in life and to help that baby thrive, whether that means they need diapers and formula, or maybe they need counseling, or maybe they need to know a financial class. Whatever it is, there are thousands of pregnancy resource centers in the state of Texas, but we want to make sure women know about these pregnancy resource centers, because many women don't know that that's their option, to have their baby live and to actually thrive afterwards. So that's why we have the TexasHeartbeatLaw.com. Please write down that that web address because that has a plethora of information where you can find out how you can get help if you ever find yourself in that situation where you choose life for your child, but there's just other circumstances that are difficult for you. You can find out more about the legalese of the heartbeat law as well. So if you're just a concerned citizen, a pro-life person who wants to know more about the heartbeat law and digest those very complicated things about it, we have one-pagers on that website as well. And we also have different stories, different articles written by members of our team on that website where you can learn about different things that were happening up until we got to the Supreme Court. And you can find out that information as well. But I think the best part of that website, like Covey said, is connecting those women to those thousands of pregnancy resource centers or different other things that can help them. As you remember, we had something great happen in this past session besides the Texas heartbeat law, and that was the increase in the funding to the Alternatives to Abortion program. That program's been around for a while, but this year in the budget, the Texas legislature was actually able to attribute $100 million to that program. So that program is growing. We have a ton of money that we can give to these women in need. But if you want to know more about that, you need to visit texasheartbeatlaw.com. So be sure to check out texasheartbeatlaw.com so you can find out more about that law and more about how we can help these women and babies thrive in the future.
Absolutely. TexasHeartbeatLaw.com. Well, switching topics for just a moment, there's been just an intense level of interest recently in the vaccine mandates that President Biden has put out through the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And this is being litigated as well. You had some business groups and some states who came together to bring a lawsuit saying that this rule that employees have to be vaccinated in order to keep their jobs is unconstitutional. And they had oral arguments at the same time as the heartbeat law case today. And Mary Elizabeth, you were listening in on that and taking notes for us. Tell us a little bit about how that went.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I will say, we did submit a brief to the court earlier this week, and we had 30 states Family Policy Council sign on to that brief. It was a very interesting argument, I will say. You did have a discussion about the very complicated legalese of administrative powers. There wasn't too much mention of religious liberty, which I think would have been a really strong case to make, how it violates religious liberty and religious beliefs, especially when you had the Navy SEAL victory not too recently. So I was hoping there would be more discussion about that. However, they got more into just the administrative powers of the OSHA and whether or not they can mandate these vaccines. But, even then, it wasn't really strong for OSHA because they say how they've never mandated a flu vaccine and they never mandated some of these other things that, affect you outside of the job. Now, they may mandate something that affects you inside the job, like wearing a hard hat because you have, things falling down on you, but they don't affect things that affect you 24 hours when you're outside the job, which in essence is COVID. So there are a lot of pokes at this, argument that OSHA can actually have these vaccine mandates. But I think it went down to the very main issue that, people could lose their jobs and that's kind of a greater risk than what we're seeing with whether or not they can get vaccines. And just a lot of arguments on whether or not OSHA did the work to see why they got the vaccine. That was brought out too, that OSHA didn't really present any research why they thought that was the best method. So a lot came out that poked at those holes, but it will be interesting to see what the decision is in that case as well.
Fascinating legal arguments today, and even somewhat unusual to see the Supreme Court having oral arguments on a Friday. But that's what we do here at Texas Values. We monitor those. We try to take down the analysis for you and make that available to you. And you can find all that and so much more on txvalues.org. We have a number of resources, not only on vaccines and on pro-life, but on so many other issues related to faith and family and freedom in the state of Texas. So texasvalues.org, if you want to check out our website, and we'll be back with you again soon. And we want to thank you right now for joining us on this Texas Values Facebook Live.